Yes, my name is Kuldeep Singh Randawa. I'm making this video as one of many videos which is going to be embedded onto the website www.realrandawa.com. It has become necessary for me to do a video on concept reviews because it's pretty clear to me that the engineering profession is not regulated according to the standards required of a learned profession. We have a situation where lawyers who have become so corrupt and so out of control that they have crossed the line to a point where public safety is interfered with, to a point that they would actually put a professional engineer out of business and not hold accountable those professional engineers who have done crimes and involved in serious fraud. So we have large firms who are backing up with this type of criminal activity that's taking place, where a lot of lawyers generally have a large fund available so that if they are sued, they have access to those funds. So clearly this is not an easy task for someone like myself, who has now been put out of business for literally close to 2 decades. But I have not left my profession, and I never will. But it doesn't just stop there. It continues on, because what they're trying to do is destroy the career of a person who speaks the truth. It doesn't matter whether it's an engineer or whether it's a doctor who wants to speak the truth. The general consensus is, in order for this nation to be controlled and work outside of the law, those professionals who have the capability of speaking the truth have to be destroyed. So this is a constant message that is coming across in the other videos itself. But let's talk about what a concept review is, because it's important to understand where the engineering body APEGBC has clearly violated various laws and have actually supported crimes. It actually was an insurance regulatory fraud. When a professional engineer does a design of a structure, he has to look at the various concepts of how a particular structure will take those loads. To do that, one has to consider what the loads are, which are applicable. Not all loads are going to be applicable to every type of structure. You also have to consider which code of practice are you going to use. For example, in making an obvious statement, if you're designing a ship that floats in the water, or you're designing an aeroplane which flies in the air, the codes of practice are different. And you do not use a code of practice for ships to design an aeroplane. Now this is a pretty obvious statement. I think most people who are not even engineers would understand this. But yet we have an engineering body called APEGBC that in designing a water tank considered a building code, when a water tank is not a building. And then you have this thing called load cases, because you have a combination of all applicable loads which are relevant to the structure, which have to be considered as part of the concept review. So to give you an example, because many people out there are not engineers, so this is sort of a structural engineering 101, one of the first lessons that perhaps a student would do in an engineering school. So you have a beam that's going to be used in a building, and you would have to conceptualize one of the load cases, which is D plus L. D is the dead load, L is the live load. The dead load is basically the self-weight of a beam and the self-weight of the floor that is being supported by the beam. The live load is physically the people walking on the floor itself, plus the furniture, or plus any other type of load which is relevant to the usage of that particular building. So when you have a design review done, it's important that you use the right load cases. In doing the concept review, it's not necessary to do the calculations. That comes later on. If you have the right load case, then you can do the calculations. If you have the wrong load case, then you wouldn't do the calculations because they're not relevant to that design of the beam, because the load case is not applicable. And so this is really part of the concept review. In the case of APEGBC versus Rendawa, which was a process, a discipline process that was held in the boardroom of the engineering offices in Burnaby, BC. So everything is recorded. You have 3 professional engineers who would be acting as judges. They're called the peer of the professionals who is being disciplined. And so when you have a discipline process and you're doing an investigation of a structural matter, then you're supposed to have 3 professional engineers who are your peers who are trained for structural engineering. In my case, they had 1 electrical engineer appointed. I have no reason whatsoever that I can explain why they would choose an electrical engineer to decide a structural engineering matter. But yet, the professional body appointed an electrical engineer to be part of the peers. I believe those individuals were selected not because of their qualifications. They were selected because they were somewhat compromised. Because the intent wasn't to evaluate what went wrong. It wasn't about learning lessons. It was about putting a professional engineer out of business. And so the entire matter is recorded. So there's transcripts which are available. And there's a lawyer for the association, and there's a lawyer acting for the person who is being disciplined. In this case, it's John Piemonte, who was acting for me. Now, the option does exist where an engineer can go into these proceedings and say he wants to represent himself. But considering the nature of this problem and the fact that disclosure was not being made for up to 2 years, because it all started in 2003, and it took 2 years of various letters being written between my lawyer, John Piemonte, and Robert Hunter, who was a lawyer for the association, who was one of the partners or the lawyer at Bullhauser and Tupper. And this lawyer was teaching professional engineers on what you can do and not do as part of expert witness training courses. So he's being paid by professional engineers. But yet this lawyer, I believe, knew from day one that the structure that was being constructed had no pipes. And so disclosure was not made for up to 2 years. The disclosure was eventually made literally days before the hearing in April of 2005. So when the association was not disclosing these things, that's an indication that they're basically covering up the fraud that they were aware of. And the function of this lawyer, Robert Hunter, is not to misguide the peers. They're acting for the association, so the 3 professional engineers who are there, who are supposed to be deciding these things, they're supposed to have a mind of their own. They can't be persuaded by a lawyer and misguided. And I think that has happened here. But the fact that is so basic, considering that we had proceeded, me and John Piemonte had proceeded on the basis that we wanted Paul Hu to admit to errors being made in his report. To do that, we had to qualify the expert report, despite the fact that it had numerous errors. Because if we had managed to get Paul Hu to admit to making engineering errors in front of the peers, the whole thing should have been thrown out, and it wasn't. And so, just so that the public knows how basic this concept is of proving the crimes and the misconduct of Paul Hu, he prepared this report using a building code when a water tank is not a building. He used a load case H plus W. What is H and what is W? H is the hydrostatic pressure of the water, which is inside the tank, and W is the wind load that is applied on the water tank. And let me say right here, to get this out of the way, there was no water tank even built. It's important for the public to know this, but I have to, as part of this video, refer to the structure, because that entire process was the investigation of a failure of a water tank. And so I have to refer to it as a water tank. So the load case H plus W, I can explain that in very layman terms. You don't have to be a professional engineer. Even a child of 5 years can understand this. So even if you're not a professional engineer, you would understand this. If you take a glass, put water in it, the water is inside the glass. Because it's inside the glass, it's pushing outwards. And so the sign in front of H is a plus, not a negative. It's a plus because it's inside the glass pushing outwards. And so the load case was H plus W. What Paul Hu is really saying is that the wind is going to go inside the water, which is in the glass, and then act outwards. And that's why it's H plus W. It's going inside the water and then acting outwards because we have a circular tank. Even a child knows that when you blow over this glass of water, it's going to create ripples of the water which is inside the glass, but it will never enter inside the body of water which is inside that glass. So the load case of H plus W is an invalid load case. This is not rocket science. This is not complicated. This is an engineer who did not know how to design a water tank. He failed in his concept review because he selected an invalid load case. And this is not just one of those load cases which was incorrect. There were quite a few other situations. In fact, this report had close to 50 errors in there from an engineering point of view. I clearly cannot make 50 videos to explain each and every one. That's going to be for the court. Once I'm permitted to walk into the courtroom where the sheriffs will not search me and I can eventually appear before a judge who's not corrupt and not supporting the crimes of the Engineering Association. So it's an invalid load case. So now you've got a situation where you've got the three peers who are professional engineers, Robert Hunter, who was the lawyer for the association. You've got the association itself as a legal entity. You've got the professional engineers who are working for the association, all of whom are professional engineers. All of those guys don't know what a concept review is. And if they knew what a concept review is, then what was the point of saying that Mr. Randhawa did not do a concept review? One of the allegations against me was I didn't do a concept review. What about those professional engineers saying Paul Hu doesn't know how to do a concept review. And that report that we accepted, the concept review had failed. And the other people who signed this report should have been investigated, because Paul Hu was not the only signatory on that report. This is an engineering body that does not know how to design water tanks, so it relies on professionals and experts to do that. And this expert did not know how to design this water tank. He chose a building code to design a water tank. For heaven's sakes, man. Are the professional engineers out there listening to this? We are paying fees to an engineering body to mess up the engineering profession. And they've made so many errors and so many people are harmed in this process. And so it's about time that we take back our profession, and the entire body of the association has not been regulating the profession. What they have been doing is putting good engineers out of business so they can start scamming engineers who are being subjected to baseless investigations, whilst protecting those professional engineers who are involved in crimes and scams. And if those people were investigated, which they never will be, in fact, they're offered some sort of an agreement. So Paul Hu has not been investigated, despite admitting to making errors in his own report, and despite saying Mr. Randhawa did the right calculations. None of that is in the determination. So that determination that's been posted against me, defaming my good name for 20 years, is fraudulent. As a professional engineer, I cannot accept that, because it would not be ethical. This is precisely why I challenge the association, because they cannot force a person to accept a fraudulent report. I will not do it. That's why I challenge them, and I will not breach my standards and ethics. Those people who have need to be investigated. Those people who did the crimes need to be reported to the RCMP. And I want all those people within the association who have breached the Engineers Act to be investigated. So the question now is, who investigates the investigators? It's the victims who have been harmed. We are the ones who are going to investigate it. And all those professional engineers who have been harmed by this organization called APEGBC, I need to hear from you. I think we need to form our own association. And the purpose of this association is to hold APEGBC accountable for all those crimes they did to good professional engineers. Thank you.